Biotish hopefully will be back this week against Philly. That interior of the Eagles D-line is really, really good, and they gave the Commanders' O-line a lot of trouble last time they played. So it's a really good chance to bounce back against a really good team and show who you are.
I really struggle with what to make of this game. They won. That's fantastic. That part I know. The performance, like it was tight. They took the 2-point conversion thing at the end. Part of that is because of the clock shenanigans. But even then, it's probably closer than you want. But also, you go back and watch the tape, and it's like actually played pretty good. It feels like most snaps. Here we sit on Tuesday, almost 48 hours later. What do you make of that performance on Sunday?
Certainly was an uneven performance. You hate to see a second half when you go into halftime up 14-0 and have to hold off the 2-point conversion for the win. But I think there are takeaways that you can be okay with. I think the Marshawn Lattimore, the fact that, he was out there, he was healthy, he played the game. The Saints obviously know him very well, decided they didn't want to target him. And the fact that Mike Sainristil still stepped up and had the interception, had a couple of PVUs, played pretty nicely on the back end there, I think is a nice preview to what you hope this secondary looks like. Obviously, you're concerned about the concussions with both Zach Ertz and Jeremy Chin, but ultimately I liked what I saw for the most part out of the defense, because despite the fact that Jake Haener and quite frankly Spencer Rattler aren't particularly good quarterbacks, for the most part they did a pretty good job of not allowing that Saints offense to get going. And you saw a healthy Marshawn Lattimore on the defense, and for me, that's the takeaway that I get from him.
So if we stick with the defense first, they generated a ton of pressure in the first half. They were not as consistent with pressure in the second half. Anything that you could identify that you kind of lined that up to?
I mean, I think you went from having a statue in Jake Haener back there in the second half when Spencer Rattler came out. He was able to move around a little bit. I also think they were trying to play a couple little mind games with some young quarterbacks. I think you saw Joe Witt trying to butch up the defense a little bit, kind of fake a couple blitzes, bait Spencer Rattler into some bad throws, which ultimately he didn't make on Sunday. But if you've watched the tape from him and looked at the numbers that he's put up here in the NFL, he's kind of prone to make a couple bad throws a game, and we know how much Joe Witt Jr. wants to get those turnover numbers up. I think obviously he had to be excited about, Sanders still getting the INT there. And, I think they were hoping that they were going to be able to bait a young quarterback into a few more mistakes. So they weren't quite as electric getting after the quarterback because of that.
Yeah. Also, Mitchell, how do we teach everyone that's on defense that's not named Mike Sainristil to catch? Like Frankie Louvu got hit in the face with the ball. Chin had one, if not two, go through his hands. What do we got to do to get turnovers? And if we do, is Joe Witt going to hand us all $1,000? Because I think that man's head is going to combust. I thought it was going to combust Thursday before he had 2 or 3 more dropped interceptions on Sunday. He said, was it like 12 in the last month, balls that have hit them in the hands? What do we got to do there?
I'll tell you what, if you and I could figure out a way to teach DBs to catch the football, we'd be making way more than $1,000, Joey.
We'd be making DJ Diesel money. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Listen, but I will say that, the downside of it is that they're not creating these turnovers. I would say the plus side of it is you can see the defensive formations and the defensive plan working. These guys are in position to make plays. They're just not able to do it. Sunday, I think, was a little frustrating because some of your better players, guys who you think are going to be contributors, beyond this season, were the ones that weren't making the plays. But if you go back earlier in the season, you've seen guys in position ready to, pick a ball off or punch a ball out or, make a play to get a strip sack, whatever it may be. And you look at it and you're like, man, this plan is there. You can see this defense. The guys are in the right positions. The guys are, able to be in position to make plays. They just don't quite have the individual talent sometimes to go do it. So short term, it's very frustrating, especially when you see guys like Luvu and Chin drop balls because they're better football players. But long term, I like what I'm seeing from this defense, and I like what Joe was putting out there with the quote-unquote limited talent that he has at the moment.
I think that is a great point. Like, the system is working, the pieces have to execute because those guys are there. And again, DBs and linebackers not being able to catch is a tale as old as time in the NFL. It's why the old joke, like, oh, that's why he plays DB, exists. Mitch Tischler with us here on the Hoffman Show, of course, co-host of the Beltway Football Podcast. Last thing from the defense real quick, as I peel through my notes again from the second half and kind of trying to figure out the pressure thing. They also ran the ball more in the second half, which is an odd thing that the Saints did considering they were down. But they got a couple of chunks and kind of would go back to it in some of these softer coverage structures as the Commanders, I don't want to say went into prevent mode, but certainly were not trying to give up big explosive plays through the air to a guy in Spencer Rattler who's very willing to throw if you give him an inch the ball down the field. And some of their guys up front got a little bit. There was some real movement up front. What did you make of how the D-line played against the run and then also their ability to generate pass rush or not in this game?
Yeah, I mean, that Saints offensive line isn't particularly good. The interior of that offensive line, center, both guards are not starters from the beginning of the season, guys that had to fill in because of injury. You have two very young tackles on the outside. It's a group that I thought this Commanders D-line was going to be able to take a little bit more advantage of. But I think what you said there about not wanting to get beat over the top is a very important piece to all this because, again, it wasn't a prevent defense, like you said, but you are looking at a quarterback that I would not trust to put together a 10 or 15 play drive to go down and score a touchdown. And so I'm okay with a little bit of the bend that they gave, especially early in that second half, to the Saints there. I do want to see more individual wins. They're doing a good job, rushing as a collective and not letting quarterbacks break contain and all those different things. But you want to see your guys win some one-on-one battles and get a free run, at the quarterback. And I think we saw that from the safety line against Jaden Daniels. And obviously Cam Jordan is an unbelievable football player. And, I don't know that the Commanders have somebody that necessarily is of his, overall skill level. But, that's a guy who is disruptive because he goes out and wins a one-on-one battle and gets to Jaden before he's able to, go around and make his plays. I want to see more of that from Deron Payne. I want to see more of that from Dorrance Armstrong. It was good to see Dorrance get back on the sack train again. It had been a few weeks since he had one. I think we've seen kind of nicely from Dante Fowler over the season. He's done a pretty good job of winning some battles one-on-one, but there needs to be, some more alpha play from this D-line. And I'm hoping that, they're starting to see the importance of kind of, playing within a defense, but also whooping the guy in front of you and going and making a big play.
Yeah, 19 pressures according to PFF in this game, which is a pretty solid number. And Payne actually had 4 of them. Had a batted ball or 2 in this game as well. But you'd love to see just like some of those dominant sequences a little bit more often, I think, and the consistency throughout a game is, I think, what everyone's kind of hoping can eventually get there. On the offensive line, Mitch, it was a weird game because they gave up a ton of sacks. The sacks weren't necessarily their fault. Jaden was kind of the culprit for a fair amount of those. He played incredible. They played poorly. All those things aren't supposed to go together. It seems like I'm talking about 2 different games, but that's how I saw it. What did you make of the Commanders' O-line struggles in this game? Whatever struggles you attribute to them in pass protection, and then especially their inability to get things going on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start quickly with the Jaden Daniels and the sacks. Yes, 8 is a big number. A couple of those were 0-yard rushes. I thought it was interesting in post-game, Dan Quinn pointed out that they've been working with Jaden at staying in the pocket and trying to work his way through progressions a little bit more. And I'm hoping that was the reason that we saw him hold the ball in the pocket a little more often this week against the Saints than we've seen kind of in weeks past, in that was a kind of a coaching point this week that they were working on him with, and he was trying to execute in-game. Because quite frankly, him holding the ball hasn't really been a big problem this season. It just didn't look particularly good on Sunday. And to me, I put a lot of the O-line issues on, what happened at center. Having your starting center, Tyler Biadasz, go out with the sickness, morning of the game. Michael Dieter's a veteran. He and Biadasz were at Wisconsin together. Biadasz has credited Dieter a lot throughout his career for somebody who helped kind of get him going and learning how to play that center position at a elevated level. I think Dieter struggled pretty mightily, not really in the one-on-one blocking per se, but being that kind of leader of the offensive line, identifying defenses, moving protections. I think his timing was clearly off with Jaden Daniels. I thought his snaps came back, a little bit kind of lollipops, a little soft back to Jaden, and particularly when they tried, especially in that second half, to get some of those tempo plays going and the timing plays where you get the ball out quickly. When the snap comes back slowly, it just throws off the entire timing of the play and is an issue. And then, even pre-snap, the timing of when Dieter would snap the ball back to Jaden, I think he caught Sam Cosmi a couple times when Sam was still looking back at Jaden, waiting for, the snap count. So I just think that the timing was kind of thrown off by the center position and the late add of Dieter there. Ideally, that's not a problem, but I'm hoping that we can write off the sack, some of the sack issues, some of the not being able to get the running game going against the very, very, very porous Saints run defense. To the fact that you didn't have your starting center in there, you had a center and quarterback who hadn't worked together a ton, and I think that kind of showed on Sunday.
Mitch Tischler, Beltway Football Podcast, with us here on the Hoffman Show. Yeah, the snap thing was so weird. Just to see an offensive line that typically offensive line play, especially good ones, and this team this year has largely been one of those in this regard anyway. Like, they're so coordinated. It's so synchronized. And to see, like, Dieter snap the ball and go, and everyone else is still kind of mostly in their stance, you're like, what is going on here? And Cosmi, I thought, had his worst game of the season, and I do wonder how much of that was directly correlated to just feeling like he was behind all day, and the timing of all these combinations are just off. And so when people, obviously the immediate reaction, especially because we did a segment last week in our Take Command mailbag about Cornelius Lucas versus Andrew Wiley, immediately I think a lot of people were like, oh, well, see, it should have just been Lucas. And it's like, no, Andrew Wiley was just fine. Actually, I would argue he was arguably the best offensive lineman they had in this game. The problem was everyone else, and the closer you got to the center, it seemed like the bigger the problems were.
Yeah, there was a draw play they tried to run. I believe it was the middle of the third quarter that kind of highlighted the snap issues across the board. You had Dieter snap the ball while Cosmi was turning back from the quarterback to catch up with the D tackle in front of him. Dieter gets beat immediately. Cosmi holds on, decently, but then ultimately gets beat because he started behind on the play. The snap goes back to Jaden, kind of lollipops and high. That throws off the timing of the delay handoff to Brian Robinson. Ultimately, he gets drops for a 3-4 yard loss, and it just kind of, to me, was all encompassing of what some of those issues were along the offensive line. And quite frankly, I think Cosmi gets a little bit too much blame sometimes. Maybe that's not the right word, but with this fan base, because we expect them to play at such a high level all the time. But with everything that happens along the offensive line, it's choreographed. And when one piece is off or one piece is late or there's one piece of miscommunication, it can make somebody look really, really bad, even if that wasn't their mistake that caused the play to get blown up. So I am hopeful that things get better. I think they need to get better. Biotish hopefully will be back this week against Philly. That interior of the Eagles D-line is really, really good, and they gave the Commanders O-line a lot of trouble last time they played. So it's a really good chance to bounce back against a really good team and show who you are.
Last thing I'll ask you about, Mitch, is the receiving core. Obviously, with first game without Noah Brown, you lose Zach Ertz midway through. All in all, how do you think that they did? And then, it's kind of funny that KJ Osborne, who I'm not like, yeah, that guy's awesome. There's just a couple plays in this game where, like, man, he would have been really helpful, including that 3rd and 1 at the goal line where Luke McCaffrey doesn't do near enough and Cam Jordan winds up with the sack. But how do you feel about this receiving core without Noah Brown in game 1? And then how much bigger does Zach Ertz and his availability become against Philadelphia, considering what we saw?
Yeah, I'll start with Luke McCaffrey on Cam Jordan. That's a really tough ask of Luke McCaffrey. That's a big man who's really good. Luke didn't get over there, so certainly he owned some of it. But I think when we talked about Noah Brown's injury last week, during this segment, one of the things I brought up was how good Noah Brown was in blocking in the run game and helping extend some of these plays. And I think, you're going to see some of that along the way here, because as much as, they have a bunch of guys that can fill in, that was one thing that Noah did particularly well, was block in the run game. I really liked what I saw from Jamison Crowder. I think it's going to be interesting to see, as he gets more involved in this offense, how they deploy him. I love seeing him, working on special teams as well. But I think in the slot, he's just a crafty veteran that kind of has been there and done that, and finds ways to kind of get open. Not so indifferent from, Olamide Zaccheaus per se, but I do think that he's a little bit more, I think Zaccheaus might have a little bit more quickness, but I think Crowder has a little bit more wit / veteran savviness, whatever the word you want to use for it is. I think he's going to be a bigger part of this offense as we go forward, and I like the idea of seeing him out there. But ultimately, between the Ertz injury, which is probably at least going to sideline him this week, who knows with concussions what happens. You're going to have some guys step up, and it's a really, really, to me, big opportunity for a guy like Ben Sennett, who hasn't been a huge part of this offense, has shown a willingness to stick his nose in there and make some blocks when they come with that 12 or 13 personnel. And I think we're going to see him line up in the slot, not necessarily in a 3-point stance as much, and they'll get a chance to run some routes and show off some of those hands and quickness that the Commanders drafted him for.
I mean, the thing is for him though, does he actually have quickness, or is he just kind of fast and powerful? Someone was commenting on our YouTube page earlier and was like, people think he's more like Kittle or Kelsey, and he's actually more like Gronk. And I'm like, yeah, but Gronk was 6'7". You can't play like Gronk if you're not built like Gronk. And so that's the thing that I really wonder is if Ertz is out, I actually think Crowder becomes the more direct replacement. You need a guy that can reliably win inside, and his quickness can do that. And then ironically, the guy who I think actually should replace him as a blocker and, gets more reps is KJ Osborne. Like, if KJ Osborne is ready to go last week, I don't think Luke McCaffrey's in that spot on the end of the line of scrimmage, knowing I got to tighten my split down, and my number one job is to make sure that Cam Jordan doesn't get in the backfield. So I think Osborne is helpful to replace some part of the tight end production, because I think that's also, by the way, a Zach Ertz play. I think that's a 13 personnel play that they decided to run anyway with Luke McCaffrey, and KJ Osborne takes that, and then Crowder takes some of the route running, and man, Sennett in the long term, he's got to do better than he's done this year, but he is a rookie, and I think my eyes for Ben Sennett are much more long term at this point based off what he is right now.
You want to know my comp for Ben Sennett? He's a young Zach Ertz. If I look at Ertz the earlier years in Philly as he was kind of getting his feet under him, I think that's kind of who Sennett can be. He's never going to wow you with his speed, but I do think his size and his ability to use it, and the hands, which we saw in camp and in the preseason, some are better than some. And I do think that most of the passing production from Ertz is going to be replaced by wide receivers, but you got to have somebody who can catch the ball at tight end. And I think Sennett has a chance here to have a decent little game against a Phillies group Eagles group that doesn't always do great against tight end.
We will see you on Sunday. Mitch, appreciate your time as always, my friend. Have a great rest of your week, and I will see you at Northwest Stadium on Sunday for the showdown.
Looking forward to it, bud.
That is Mitch Tischler, everybody. And, of course, the Beltway Football Podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts, and they do a live stream on the Monumental Sports app post-game, Mitchell and J.P. Finley.